HR conference room had that particular kind of silence, the kind that happens when 40 people are waiting for someone to get humiliated. My manager, Richard, stood at the head of the table with a laser pointer and a confidence that made my stomach turn. On the screen behind him was a slide deck. The project, my project, 18 months of my life projected onto a 10-foot wall with someone else's name in the footer. Marcus has done exceptional work leading the Bridgewater integration, Richard said, clicking to the next slide. This is exactly the kind of initiative-taking we reward here. Marcus sat 2 seats to my left, nodding slowly the way people do when they're trying to look humble but can't quite hide the satisfaction underneath. He glanced at me once. Just once. I kept my hands flat on the table. I kept my face still. I had learned a long time ago that the room doesn't care if you're right. The room cares who performs better in the moment. And I had something better than a performance prepared. But to understand why I was sitting there that day, you have to understand why I was sitting there that day. You have to understand where I came from. Because this wasn't the first time I'd been erased. It was just the first time I'd been ready for it. I grew up in a house in Dayton, Ohio, where my brother Kevin could do no wrong. Not because he was exceptional, because my parents decided early on that he would be, and they spent the next 20 years making that decision feel like fact. Kevin was 3 years older than me. Loud, charming in the way that works on adults who don't live too closely. He played baseball through high school. Not well enough for a scholarship, well enough for my father to take every Friday off work during the season. My mother kept a scrapbook. Kevin's photos filled 4 volumes on the living room shelf. Mine don't appear until volume 3, in the background of one of his birthday pictures. I don't say this to sound sorry for myself. I stopped feeling sorry for myself around age 12. I say it because the pattern matters. You have to see the pattern to understand the rest. When I was 9, I saved my birthday money for 3 months to buy a telescope. I'd read about a meteor shower and I wanted to see it. The night it happened, Kevin borrowed the telescope without asking, took it to a friend's house and dropped it on a concrete driveway. The lens cracked. When I told my father, he looked at the telescope, looked at Kevin and said, "It was an accident. You shouldn't have left it where he could trip over it." I had not left it where he could trip over it. It had been on the shelf in my closet with the door closed. My mother patted my shoulder and said, "You're the responsible one. You'll figure it out." Responsible. That word followed me like a shadow with bad intentions. It meant I was expected to manage, to adapt, to absorb whatever landed on me without making noise about it. It never meant I was valued. It meant I was useful. There's a difference, and it took me years to fully understand it. High school was more of the same. Kevin made friends effortlessly, showed up late to things and got forgiven, borrowed money from my parents and called it an advance on his future success. My parents thought this was charming. "He thinks big," my father would say. I made honor roll every semester, ran cross-country, worked weekends at a coffee shop downtown so I could pay for my own things. Nobody threw me a party. My mother once said, "You make it so easy. We never have to worry about you." I understand now that this was not a compliment. I left for Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship and worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. A campus cafe in the mornings and a restaurant on weekends. Kevin went to a state school on my parents' dime, changed his major 3 times, and graduated a semester late. They drove up for his graduation in a rented car. Mine was a FaceTime call from the parking lot of a Kroger because they were busy helping Kevin move. I didn't cry about it. I'd stopped expecting things to be fair inside that family a long time ago. What I had learned instead was something more useful. I kept records. Not obsessively, not with any particular plan. Just a habit. My coffee shop job taught me that if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. So I wrote things down, I saved receipts, I kept emails. It was just how I operated. That habit would save me eventually. But first, I had to build something worth saving. I moved to Chicago at 24 with a marketing degree, 3 months of savings, and absolutely nobody waiting for me there. I took a junior analyst role at a mid-sized tech consulting firm called Greystone Solutions. The pay was modest, the hours were long, and the office culture ran on a combination of caffeine and the unspoken understanding that good work would eventually be noticed. I believed that then. I was still in the process of learning better. My first 2 years at Greystone were unremarkable on the surface. I learned the systems, learned the clients, Learned which people in the office actually did the work versus which people were good at being seen doing the work. I fell into the first category. I know that now. At the time, I thought it was enough. The Bridgewater account changed everything. Bridgewater Financial was a mid-sized regional bank based in Cincinnati. Not glamorous, but the contract was significant and the project was complex. They needed their legacy data systems integrated with a new platform, a process that required mapping thousands of data points across incompatible architectures, building custom API bridges, managing a vendor relationship with a third party in Austin, and somehow doing all of this without disrupting their daily operations. Richard, my manager, announced at the kickoff meeting that he was assigning Marcus Chen to lead the project and me to support. Marcus had been at Greystone 3 years longer than me and had a way of speaking in meetings that made people feel he understood things he hadn't quite understood yet. He was good at confidence. He was less good at the actual work. 2 months in, Marcus was overwhelmed. He came to me on a Thursday afternoon, sat down at my desk, and said very quietly, "I need help. I don't know the data architecture well enough to answer their questions tomorrow." I looked at him for a long moment. "I'll walk you through it," I said. That was the beginning of an arrangement that lasted 16 months. I built the documentation, I mapped the integration pathways, I managed the vendor calls with the Austin team because Marcus consistently misunderstood what they were asking for, and I got tired of spending the first 20 minutes of every call undoing the confusion from the last one. I wrote the status reports. I drafted the client presentations. I solved the 3 critical failures that came up in months, 4, 9, and 14. Each one at odd hours, each one requiring a depth of understanding that takes months to build and can't be faked in a meeting. Marcus reviewed my work. He approved my work. He presented my work. I told myself this was how things worked at the beginning of a career. You build credibility by being indispensable. You prove yourself through contribution. Eventually, the right people notice. I had not yet learned that the right people often don't notice unless you make them. Kevin called me during month 11 of the project. He'd moved back home after a startup he'd joined in Columbus, pivoted in a direction that apparently didn't include his position. He was figuring things out, he said, living with my parents, sleeping in his old room, working on a business idea he was excited about. "What kind of business?" I asked. "Consulting," he said. "Like what you do." I asked what he knew about consulting. He said he'd been reading about it. I said that was great and let him talk for a while, then got back to work. He called again 3 months later. The business idea had evolved. He'd been talking to some people. He wanted to know if I could get him connected with anyone at Greystone. Maybe get him in the door for a conversation. "I don't really have that kind of pull," I said. "I'm still junior level here." "You've been there 2 years, he said, like that was a long time. "That's not how it works," I said. He didn't push. He moved on to other things in the conversation, but I noticed he'd started calling more regularly, asking specific questions about what I did, what clients I worked with, what the project was about. I answered carefully. I was used to Kevin's curiosity coming with strings I couldn't always see. The Bridgewater project wrapped in March. The integration had gone live the previous month without incident, which, if you've ever worked on a project like this, you know is genuinely remarkable. Bridgewater's operations team sent Greystone a letter of commendation. Richard forwarded it to the department with a note saying the team had done outstanding work. The team. No names. I noticed. I should have said something then. I know that now. But I was still operating on the old belief system: do good work, be patient, your turn will come. 2 weeks after the project closed, Richard announced a department-wide meeting to recognize the Bridgewater success. This was unusual. Recognition meetings at Greystone were rare. I assumed it was because the project had been significant enough to warrant it. I wore the blazer I reserved for client presentations, and that's where we come back to that conference room. 40 people. A laser pointer. Marcus Chen's name on the slide. Richard spent 20 minutes walking through the project highlights, and in those 20 minutes my name appeared once in a bullet point listing supporting analysts. Marcus was mentioned 11 times. I counted. I had a notepad in front of me and I wrote down a small mark each time. 11 marks by the time Richard clicked to the final slide. Marcus stood up to say a few words. He was gracious in a careful way, thanking the team, without specifying who was on it. He made a joke about the difficult nights in month 9, which, for the record, I had spent on a call with the Austin vendor from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. while Marcus was unreachable on his phone. Everyone laughed. I wrote down another mark. Not for Marcus this time. Just for myself. A reminder. After the meeting, a few colleagues stopped to congratulate Marcus in the hallway. I walked back to my desk. My hands were steady. My face was neutral. Internally, I was doing the calculation I'd been running for weeks, since I'd started to sense where this was heading. I had everything. I had it all saved in a folder on my personal drive that I'd backed up twice. 2 days later, Marcus stopped by my desk. He looked uncomfortable in the specific way people look when they're about to ask for something they know they don't deserve. I wanted to say, "You were a huge part of this," he said. "I hope you know that." "I do know that," I said. He nodded, looked relieved, and left. The following Monday, Richard called me into his office and told me that Marcus had been promoted to senior consultant. There was a pay band increase. He would be taking lead on 2 new accounts. Richard said this in the tone of someone delivering good news to a room, and I was the room. "What about my role?" I asked. "We're looking at a possible expansion," he said. "You've been a strong contributor. We want to keep building your profile here." Building my profile? I had just spent 18 months building someone else's. I thanked him and left. In the elevator, I took out my phone and sent one email. It went to Susan Park, who was the VP of Client Services and Richard's boss. It said, "Hi Susan, I'd love to find time to walk you through my contributions to the Bridgewater project. I have detailed documentation I think would be valuable context as the team moves forward. Would you have 30 minutes this week?" She wrote back in 4 hours. Thursday at 2 works. I spent the next 2 evenings organizing what I had. Not dramatizing, not editorializing, just organizing. The timeline of deliverables with my name on the original files, all time-stamped. The email chains showing me troubleshooting the month 4 failure while Marcus was in a different city at a conference. The vendor communication logs, 43 email threads with the Austin team, 39 of which I had initiated or led. The client presentation decks with my edit history still intact in the metadata. The internal Slack messages where Marcus had written things like, "Just send me whatever you have and I'll handle the presentation," and "I don't fully understand the API mapping. Can you just write up a summary I can use?" I had not saved these things with any specific plan. I had saved them because I grew up in a house where nothing you said mattered unless you could prove it, and I had carried that lesson forward whether I wanted to or not. Thursday at 2, I sat across from Susan Park in her corner office on the 14th floor with a printed binder, a USB drive, and 18 months of my own work. I walked her through it quietly. No accusations, no emotion in my voice. I showed her the first integration plan drafted by me in month 1. I showed her the vendor escalation report from month 9, written by me at midnight with Marcus's name added to the CC field the next morning. I showed her the client presentation from the final review, where every slide had been built in my template, with my charts, using my data pulls. Halfway through, Susan stopped me. "Did Marcus know you were doing this?" she asked. "He knew I was doing the work," I said. "Whether he knew I was documenting it, I can't say." She looked at me for a long moment. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" This was the question I had prepared for. "Because I believed the work would speak for itself," I said. "And I've learned that's not always how things work, so I'm here now." She nodded slowly. She flipped through the last few pages of the binder. She didn't say anything for almost a full minute, which, in a professional setting, is a very long time. Then she said, "I'm going to need to look into this." I said I understood. I left the binder with her and walked back to my desk. The next 10 days were the longest of my professional life. I kept coming in. I kept doing my work. Marcus was in the office, preparing for his new accounts, moving with the easy confidence of someone who hasn't been told yet that the ground is shifting. I didn't tell him I'd been to Susan. I didn't tell anyone. Kevin called during that stretch. My parents had told him about some of what was happening. I made the mistake of mentioning the promotion during a family dinner, and my mother had relayed it to Kevin, filtered through her interpretation, which was that I was stressed and might be overreacting. "Sounds like office politics," Kevin said on the phone. "You can't take it personally." "I'm not taking it personally," I said. "I'm documenting it." He laughed like I'd said something slightly off. "You've always been so serious, you know that? Like, sometimes you just have to play the game." "I am playing the game," I said. "I just play differently than you." He changed the subject. We talked for a few more minutes. I didn't bring it up again. On day 11, Susan Park called Richard into her office for a meeting that lasted 2 hours. I know because Marcus mentioned it in passing, puzzled. No idea what that's about, he said. I didn't offer a theory. The following Tuesday, Richard asked me to come in at 9. When I walked in, Susan was already there, sitting to the side. Richard looked like he hadn't slept well. He told me that following a review of the project documentation, leadership had some concerns about how the Bridgewater work had been attributed and recognized internally. He said this was being addressed. He said my contributions had been significantly understated in the original presentation and that this would be corrected going forward. He said Marcus's promotion was being reviewed. He said Greystone wanted to offer me a senior consultant role with a salary adjustment that reflected the level of work I had actually been performing. He said all of this looking slightly to the left of my face. I let him finish. Then I said, I appreciate the acknowledgement. I'll need to see the specifics of the offer in writing before I make any decisions. Susan, who had been quiet the whole time, looked at me with something I can only describe as respect, with a hint of relief. Like she was glad I wasn't going to make this easy. I didn't make it easy. I negotiated for 3 days with a letter from an employment attorney I'd found through a colleague, just to make clear I understood the full weight of the situation. I got the title. I got the salary. I got a written acknowledgement in my HR file that I had led the Bridgewater integration project. Marcus's promotion was quietly rescinded. They moved him sideways into a role on a different team and told the department it was a strategic realignment. Nobody announced what had happened. There was no meeting, no laser pointer, just a new signature line in my email and a slight but permanent shift in the way the office moved around me. The Monday after everything was finalized, I walked in early and sat at my desk before anyone else arrived. The office was quiet in a good way. The kind of quiet that belongs to you. I opened my laptop and looked at the folder where I'd kept everything, the emails, the logs, the documentation, all of it. I thought about deleting it now that it had served its purpose. Then I decided not to. Not out of bitterness. Just habit. Just the thing my childhood had taught me that turned out to be useful after all. Keep the record. You never know when you'll need it. My mother called that evening. Kevin had apparently heard through some chain of family communication that something had happened at my job and things had worked out. My mother said she was happy for me. She said I deserved it. Then she said, Kevin has a new business idea he's working on. He was wondering if now that you're senior level, maybe you could help him get some clients. I was quiet for a moment. I can't do that, I said. That's not how my job works. He just thought since you have more connections now. Mom, I said gently but clearly, no. She paused. You've always been so serious. I'd heard that before. The first 100 times it was meant to diminish something. I had let it. This time it just sounded like something people say when they can't think of anything else. I know, I said. Have a good night. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my apartment for a while. Not celebrating. Not relieved exactly, though there was something close to that underneath. What I felt most was clear. The kind of clear you feel when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time and you finally put it down somewhere it belongs. I had spent most of my life being told I was capable but not exceptional, reliable but not remarkable, the one who could handle things so the people who really mattered didn't have to. I had believed that long enough to carry it into my professional life and almost let it cost me something I had genuinely built. The difference in the end wasn't talent or luck or even knowing the right people. It was the folder. It was 18 months of quietly, consistently documenting reality. Every email sent, every decision made, every late night accounted for. Not because I suspected I'd need it. Because I'd learned young that the story other people tell about you can overwrite the truth if you don't have the evidence to push back. I'm not angry about what Marcus did. I understand it. When someone is in over their head and someone else keeps handing them solutions, it is deeply human to start believing you deserve the solutions. The failure wasn't entirely his. Part of it was mine. For not making my work visible sooner, for assuming the right people were paying attention, for playing a game where I knew all the rules but kept letting someone else take the points. I don't play it that way anymore. Some evenings I still stay late after the office clears out. Not because I have to, because I actually like the work, which is something I didn't fully let myself admit when I was too busy surviving to notice. I like the problem solving. I like the moment when a complicated system finally aligns and everything runs cleanly. There's a satisfaction in that which doesn't require anyone's approval. The folder is still there. I add to it regularly. Not every record is for emergencies. Some of it is just a history of what I've done, a reminder on the days when the old voice creeps back in, the one that sounds like my father saying you're responsible, which sounds like praise but isn't. That I know what I've built, and exactly how I built it. Nobody can take what you can prove is yours. That took me a long time to learn. But I learned it, and the next time someone stands up in a conference room with a laser pointer and someone else's work on the screen, I won't be sitting there with my hands flat on the table waiting for the room to notice. The folder will already be open. There's something nobody tells you about doing good work quietly for a long time. It doesn't automatically protect you. It doesn't guarantee that the right person walks in at the right moment and sets the record straight. What it does, if you're paying attention, is give you material. And material, when the moment finally comes, is everything. I spent 18 months building something real. The Bridgewater integration wasn't glamorous work. It was late nights, vendor calls that went sideways, system failures at hours when everyone else had already gone home. I solved those problems not because anyone was watching, but because the work needed to be solved. That's a distinction I used to think didn't matter. I know now it's the only one that does. Marcus didn't steal from me out of some calculated malice. That's what I've come to understand. He slipped into a pattern that I made easy for him, where my solutions kept arriving and his competence kept growing, and the gap between what he understood and what he presented kept widening, and nobody in the room was asking hard questions. That's not just his failure. Part of that was mine. I'd been so conditioned to step back, to support, to be the one who handles things without requiring acknowledgement, that I had essentially trained the people around me to expect exactly that, growing up the way I did. With Kevin getting the applause and me getting called responsible like it was a consolation prize, I learned to make myself small in a way that felt like survival. And for a long time, it was. When you grow up in a house where speaking up gets your words twisted and your silence at least keeps the peace, you carry that pattern out the door with you. Into college, into your first job, into every room where someone louder and less prepared takes up the space you earned. The thing that changed wasn't luck. It wasn't Susan Park happening to be fair-minded, though I'm grateful she was. What changed was that I stopped waiting for the story to correct itself and started holding the evidence that could correct it. Every email, every log, every late-night timestamp on a file that had my name and the metadata and nobody else's. That habit came from pain. I won't pretend otherwise. But pain has a way of teaching you things that comfort never could. Richard taught me that titles don't equal attention. Marcus taught me that proximity to good work doesn't make it yours. Kevin taught me, earlier than either of them, that if you don't document reality, someone else will narrate it for you. The folder is still on my desktop. I add to it, not out of fear anymore, out of discipline. There's a difference between hoarding grievances and maintaining a clear record of your own contribution to the world. One keeps you stuck. The other keeps you honest. What I want anyone to take from this is simple. Integrity isn't just about doing the right thing when someone is watching. It's about doing it so consistently, so precisely, so thoroughly, that when the moment of reckoning comes, and it will come, the truth is already organized and waiting. You don't have to perform it. You just have to open the folder. The work was always mine. I just had to be willing to say so.